Ready, everyone? Okay, rolling? It's rolling. Hare Krishna. Here we are again, and we're moving forward into Srila Prabhupada wanted Varnasrama. Now forgive me if this looks a little presumptuous, that I'm starting with what I think Srila Prabhupada wanted, but I'd just like to lay the groundwork for that, if you don't mind. And I am coming back to you in the next PowerPoint about the things Prabhupada said against Varnasrama, or why Varnasrama is not possible in Kali Yuga, and resolving this two things that Prabhupada said: that he wanted it, that it's possible, and that it's also certain things that it's impossible or it's not possible. So anyway, but we'll come to that in the next session. Here, Srila Prabhupada wanted Varnasrama, and we'll be talking about the following.
The only human social structure is Varnasrama. Varnasrama Dharma is meant to raise humans to bhakti. 3. Establish Varnasrama Dharma in the world as part of ISKCON's worldwide mission. 4. To exemplify Varnasrama Dharma, it should be first set up in ISKCON. 5. Varnasrama Dharma will also help practicing devotees. 6. Thus established Varnasrama Dharma in ISKCON is half of Prabhupada's mission.
Let's start at the very beginning.
The only social structure for humans is Varnasrama.
And of course, we spoke about this a little in the introduction, but let's see what Srila Prabhupada, the Lord here says.
According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable.
No argument. Krishna created everything. Krishna created the universe. Krishna created our bodies. Krishna created everything. And tasya kartaram apimam vidya kartaram avyayam. And I also created a social system by which human beings are meant to function. Krishna didn't leave a vacuum, that all right, you just all figure out how you should conduct yourselves, how you should live in this world. Krishna said, Chaturvarnam. I gave this system, and this is my system. And because it's Krishna's system, it's a perfect system. Even though there are real challenges in implementing it, and the greater challenges are, there are many, but two that one would immediately point to is, one is, we're in Kali Yuga, and two, the bad name that Varnasrama has gotten due to the caste system, and due to the exploitation by higher castes, lower castes, practically speaking, enslaving lower castes. It's really made Varnasrama even more difficult. And not even just in the outside world, but even devotees, because one of the questions devotees bring up is, well, won't it degrade into the caste system? And yes, it will. If we don't stick to yatraya lakshanam proktam, that people only achieve a certain recognition for a certain status when they have the qualification. And if you don't have the qualification, doesn't matter what your father was. If you don't have it, you don't get that. Now Srila Prabhupada continues.
For this purpose there is the Varnasrama Dharma, composed of 4 Varnas and 4 ashrams. Unless society is divided into these 8 categories, it is simply an animal civilization. There must be some systemized, regulated arrangement.
If it's not Varnasrama, it's animal. We may call India the biggest democracy, England the oldest democracy, America the best functioning democracy, although it's becoming questionable whether that's the case with the next election. And there are so many other social structures in the world. They are all animal society. Why? Tasya kartaram apimam. Because it's not Krishna's system. And because it's not meant to elevate people. It's not meant to get people out of this material world and take them back home, back to Godhead. And that's what Krishna's system is all about. Positive engagement. Brief sidetrack, I remember Brahmananda Prabhu coming to visit Chicago back in, I don't know, 1978, 79. We had a big reception for him that was still in Evanston. And he gave a little talk. And the first thing he asked is, you know, what is the most important verse of Srimad Bhagavatam? Everyone started citing so many different verses. And he said, no. Prabhupada said that, what is that? The verse that I just happened to have forgotten, which is in the first canto when he says that people don't act according to their Varna. Anyway, it emphasizes, Narada Muni is emphasizing Varnasrama. Huh? No, that's Vishnu Purana. But in any case, we'll look it up and mention it later. It's animal society. Human society means Varnashram. Prabhupada's statement, Krishna's statement, it's not something to argue. We don't necessarily like that. We like democracy. And mark well, Varnashram is not about democracy. That's what Prabhupada would call demon praising. And it doesn't work. All right, so next point.
Varnashram Dharma is meant to raise humans to bhakti.
I've already touched on this, but here Narada Muni is saying the following. In response to Yudhishthira Maharaj's question, how can human beings achieve the perfection of life, namely devotional service?
Sri Narada Muni said, after first offering my obeisances unto Lord Krishna, the protector of the religious principles of all living entities, let me explain the principles of the eternal religious system of which I've heard from the mouth of Narayan.
Here Narayan means Narayan Rishi. Narayan Rishi is the person from whom Narada Muni heard eternal principles. Varnashram is an eternal principle. It may be dealing with people's material nature, but it's Krishna's eternal principle. It's the same way that the material world is also eternal, although it's temporary, but bhutva praliyate. But it's eternally creation, maintenance, and destruction. Varnashram is an eternal system, and one of the later PowerPoints, I'll just show this exactly how eternal it really is. It's going on not only here, it's going on in the heavenly planets, and it's going on beyond there as well. So from here, Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing this principle that Varnashram is meant to raise humans to devotional service. Unless human beings come to the platform of devotional service, they may end up being gyanis or yogis and so many other things, but ultimately they will not be able to elevate themselves. They will fall down. And of course, Gyan, Yoga, Karma, these things are impossibilities in Kali Yuga. Specifically, at the end of the previous age, Narada Muni is laying down these principles. Now, Srila Prabhupada says the following.
Ultimately, the aim of Varnashram Dharma is to turn a crude man into a pure devotee of the Lord, or a Vaishnava. For this purpose, there is Varnashram Dharma, composed of 4 Varnas and 4 ashrams. Unless society is divided into these 8 categories, it is simply an animal civilization. There must be some systemized, regulated arrangement.
It's very clear, Srila Prabhupada again emphasizing, unless you divide society into the Varnas and ashrams, and according to whatever Varna is in, you have certain rights, you have certain obligations. According to your ashram, you have rights, obligations. They're not all the same. I'm a sannyasi. I don't have the right to be alone with a woman in a room. But a grihastha does, at least with his wife. He's allowed to be. So what's possible for one person is not possible for another. And there are so many other such principles. Same thing. When we read about what is the process of living of a Shudra, maintenance. No salary, no so-called freedom to do whatever they want, but complete dependence on the three higher orders. And the duty of the higher orders is to maintain them. Not something that our modern society propagates, that someone should be dominating over another. And certainly there is unlimited abuse going on in this world, which would lead us to think that, is this really practical? Well, let's talk about the principle, the theory. And therefore, I'm also talking here about the ideal. I'm very well aware, having been both in ISKCON for over 45 years, being in this material world for 67 years, that there's so much abuse going on. But nonetheless, Prabhupada wanted it. And what can you do? Therefore, at least we should be clear. Let's be clear what he wanted, and then see how we can get there. Before we say, no, it's not possible. Prabhupada says, and it's very interesting, you'll see Prabhupada uses this word, some, later on, even more specific. So he says there must be some systematic. And it may not be the Varnashram that was practiced in Treta Yuga, in Dwapara Yuga, but some system has to be there. And that's where the solution starts to come into why Varnashram can't be practiced like it was before. But some system there needs to be there. And now we're continuing.
Establishing Varnashram in the world is part of ISKCON's worldwide mission.
So ultimately we're coming down to the nuts and bolts. Varnashram is not just some type of subject that some Indologist or sociologist will study in university and teach amongst other subjects, but it's relevant to us. It's something that Prabhupada wanted us to establish in the world. And of course, for us to establish something in the world, we have to also be doing it. So for us to get everyone to chant Hare Krishna, we've got to chant Hare Krishna. For get everyone to follow four regulative principles, we have to follow regulative principles. Now there are Srila Prabhupada's many statements. For me, there are a few very poignant and very emphatic, extensive conversations by Srila Prabhupada, the main one being in the February of 1977. Later on in October, Srila Prabhupada also speaking about Varnashram, not as extensively, but repeatedly. And then, of course, you see it on the final lesson. So here's part of that conversation. And it's very interesting. The background is Satsarup Maharaj is there, Bhavananda Prabhu is there, Harisori Prabhu is there. And they're raising up all of the objections that we raised today. And Prabhupada keeps that. This conversation goes on for 45 minutes. It's not just a brief thing. And Prabhupada makes very clear what his desire and intent is. Go ahead.
Prabhupada, therefore Varnashram Dharma is required. Simply show bottle will not do. So the Varnashram Dharma should be introduced all over the world. And Satsrup, introduced starting with ISKCON community? Prabhupada, yes. Brahman, Kshatriyas, there must be regular education. Harishori, but in our community, if the being as were trained up as Vaishnavas, Prabhupada, yes.
It continues. This is the conversation. It's in Mayapur. You can learn it, look it up, and I'll be quoting more from that. But quite relevant here. Yes, it has to be introduced all over the world, starting with ISKCON. Yes. And how? From 1974 on, Srila Prabhupada started to really emphasize Varnashram College. He wanted Varnashram College in every single temple to educate devotees. And of course, one of these principles of Varnashram is education. Just because I have a propensity for music doesn't automatically mean that I'm going to be able to play instruments. I still need to learn how to write music. I still need to learn how to read it. I know how to play a piano or some other instrument. And then obviously, have to learn how to play along with others as well. either in a symphony or some other group of individuals. So there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to perfect. Education. Over and over and over, Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing education. We're continuing on again.
The Varnashram College means to train people in Varnashram life. In human society, a section of people must act as strict Brahmanas. Similarly, another section must act as strict Kshatriyas. Still another as strict Vaishyas, and the rest will be considered as Shudras and less than Shudras or the Chandalas. This is a materialistic division, but spiritually anyone can be elevated to the transcendental position simply by devotional service.
So Srila Prabhupada wanted this training. Yes, and if you study the qualities and qualifications of what it actually means as Shudra, they're hard to find. And it's not a derogatory term by any case. And of course, the question really comes up, do we become labeled Vaishnavas in one of these categories? And we'll discuss that a little later on, but the answer is no. Archa Vishnu Shiladir Gurumatir Vaishnava Jati Buddhi. Don't identify a Vaishnav with this social designation. That's not his main identity. A Vaishnav's main identity is Vaishnav, is Vaishnavi. But still, Prabhupada would use the term Brahman Vaishnav. Kolavecha Sridhar would be a Shudra Vaishnava. My main identification is Vaishnav. Why? Because he's already achieved the perfection of life. He's already come to devotional service. But if someone hasn't come to devotional service, what's their identity? What's their social identity? Then Brahmins, because they're still on the material platform. Therefore, they're either Brahmins, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, Shudras. Sometimes devotees like to be categorized amongst the Brahmanas. I find that very entertaining, because Brahman is a material designation. Why would you want to be a Brahman? No, I don't think I'm a Shudra. But why? And the example yesterday we were talking with Revati I gave is, if I tell you, you're a very big dog and you're a very small dog, does that make you better than you? We're both dogs. So material designation, to call a Vaishnav a Brahmin, is as much as an insult as to call him a Shudra, because it's material. Vaishnav Jati Buddhi. If you identify a devotee with their material designation, with the material qualities, they've already attained the perfection of the material qualities, come to devotional service. Doesn't make them transcendental, but it gives them another type of identity. They know Nitya Krishna Das. I've emphasized this a little. We'll come back to it later on, but let's move on a little. Here Srila Prabhupada makes it clear. And this is not something that's evolved in Srila Prabhupada's training, because sometimes devotees argue that in the later years, Prabhupada saw that devotees were having trouble just sticking to the principles of Krishna consciousness, so then he emphasized Varnashram. No. Prabhupada emphasized Varnashram from the very beginning. But whether devotees were dependent on it or not, and devotees would have to actually show Varnashram, but whether devotees were dependent on it or not, that was something that Srila Prabhupada emphasized. He saw, why are they falling down? Therefore, no, actually, you need it, because you're so conditioned that you need that type of conditioning which will help elevate Vaishnavas who are impeded by the modes of ignorance and passion and raise them to goodness. Because it's from goodness and in goodness that devotional service becomes very effective. Next point.
To exemplify the workings of Varnashram, it should be first set up in ISKCON.
And same conversation, 1977.
Harishori, where will we introduce the Varnashram system then? Prabhupada, in our society, amongst our members.
Pretty clear. When I was still back in my summer in engineering, once I remember working in Colorado. I was working in a pilot mill, and I was working in part of pilot project, which is meant to, on a small scale, realize things that were then built on a large scale. In this conversation, we see that this is what Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing. First, we should establish Krishna consciousness amongst members of ISKCON. And once we've set it up, then you can talk to the rest of the world. Otherwise, what will we say? If all of a sudden Narendra Modi came to us and he said, organize India. That was good luck. Organize India, but show me the model. What will you do? Well, why aren't you, are you doing it amongst yourselves? No, we're beyond this, but we'll do it for you. Well, wait a minute, you just do it yourself. And once you've done it yourself, once you have the pilot project, once you have the model, then do it for the rest of the world. So Srila Prabhupada, later on in October, is speaking.
Prabhupada, and money spent for Krishna's palace, for Krishna's temple, for Krishna's worship, as gorgeously as not for false. This is human civilization. And to organize this, Varnasrama will help you divide the society. Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya. As there is division in the body, that will help.
Srila Prabhupada wanted it. He wanted this society, this international society for Krishna consciousness, to set the example of what Varnashram means. And if devotees who are already practicing Krishna consciousness, already attained the perfection of life, who have all dedicated their lives to Srila Prabhupada, here we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of ISKCON. If we can't do it, well, how do we accept the rest of the world to do it? Because we've got unity. At least we've got unity in terms of so many ethical, spiritual principles, what to speak of. We've got unity in terms of who established, who created Varnashram, and who wanted it. So we're continuing on from this, that yes, Varnashram needs to be set up in ISKCON.
Following Varnashram Dharma also helps practicing devotees.
And it does. This was something we see, and we'll come back to this when the other presentation comes up, our next presentation about, well, Prabhupada said devotees don't need it. And it's a fact. A certain type of devotee doesn't need it. Does Arjun need Varnashram? Does Yudhishthira Maharaj need Varnashram?